The sun hung low over the Arizona Territory, painting the endless expanse of sagebrush and red rock in shades of copper and gold. Luke Redford stood on the porch of his ranch house, squinting against the dying light as he watched the dust devils dance across the valley below. At 42, he cut a solitary figure against the vast landscape, broad shoulders slightly stooped from years of hard labor, hands rough as bark, and eyes that held the quiet sadness of a man who'd buried his heart alongside his wife 3 winters past. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of decent grazing land, hard-won through sweat and stubbornness. It wasn't much by Eastern standards, but here in the territory, it was enough to make a man respectable. The house itself was simple but solid, 4 rooms of adobe and timber that Sarah had made into a home before the fever took her. Now it echoed with emptiness, each sunset bringing another night of silence that pressed against Luke's chest like a physical weight. He fingered the folded newspaper in his shirt pocket, its edges worn soft from handling. The advertisement had taken him 2 weeks to compose, each word weighed and measured like grain at market. Respectable rancher, established property, seeks correspondence with marriage-minded woman of good character, widower with no children, Arizona Territory. Simple, honest, desperate. Perhaps, though he'd never admit it aloud. The decision hadn't come easily. Pride was a luxury few men could afford in the territory, but loneliness was a poison that seeped into a man's bones during the long desert nights. His nearest neighbor lived 8 miles north, and the town of Cedar Falls was a full day's ride. A man could go weeks without hearing another human voice, and Luke had discovered that talking to horses and cattle was a poor substitute for real companionship. 6 weeks after posting the advertisement, a letter arrived. The envelope bore elegant script, postmarked from St. Louis. Luke's hands had trembled slightly as he opened it, though he'd blame it on the morning cold if anyone had been there to see. "Dear Mr. Redford," the letter began. "I read your advertisement with great interest. My name is Elena Morrison. I am 28 years of age, in good health and seeking a new beginning." There was something in those carefully chosen words, a weight that spoke of unspoken sorrows. Her letter was proper but not cold, revealing a woman of education and refinement who could quote scripture and Shakespeare with equal ease. She wrote of her skills, cooking, sewing, tending a garden, but also of her love for books and her ability to manage household accounts. Between the lines, Luke sensed a kindred spirit touched by loss. Their correspondence continued through the autumn months. Elena's letters became the highlight of Luke's weeks, her words bringing color to his monochrome existence. She wrote of her favorite poems, asked questions about ranch life, and gradually revealed glimpses of a gentle humor that made him smile despite himself. She never spoke directly of her past, only mentioning that she had no family obligations and was free to begin anew. Luke found himself taking more care with his own letters, his cramped handwriting slowly improving as he struggled to match her eloquence. He wrote of the land, the way the mountains turned purple at twilight, how the spring rains brought the desert blooming to life. He wrote of his plans for the ranch, his dreams of expanding the herd, maybe even drilling a new well. He wrote everything except the truth of how desperately he needed someone to share it all with. By December, they had agreed to meet. Elena would take the train to Tucson, then the stage to Cedar Falls. The journey would take her nearly 2 weeks, crossing half a continent to reach this rough corner of the world. Luke sent money for her passage and a photograph, a stiff daguerreotype that made him look stern and older than his years. She sent one in return, but it was small and faded, showing only the suggestion of dark hair and a serious expression. The morning of her arrival found Luke pacing the platform where the stage would stop. He'd risen before dawn, shaved twice, and put on his best shirt, the one he'd last worn to Sarah's funeral. His horse, Valor, stood tethered nearby, freshly brushed and sporting Luke's good saddle. The other men waiting for the stage gave him knowing looks. It wasn't uncommon for mail-order brides to arrive in Cedar Falls, though not all stories ended happily. Some women took one look at the harsh landscape and their weather-beaten grooms and caught the next stage back east. Others stayed but wilted like transplanted flowers, unable to adapt to the isolation and hardship. The stage arrived in a cloud of dust and noise, the driver cursing at his team as they pulled to a stop. Luke's heart hammered against his ribs as passengers began to disembark. An elderly couple emerged first, then a traveling salesman, then two cowboys heading to the mines, and then he saw her. She descended from the stage with careful grace, one gloved hand holding her skirts, the other gripping a small travel case. A dark shawl covered her hair despite the warmth of the day, and her dress, though clean and well-mended, covered her from throat to floor. The other men on the platform craned their necks for a better look, but Elena kept her head down, her face partially hidden by the shawl's shadow. Luke stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Morrison." She looked up then, and Luke's breath caught. Her face was striking rather than pretty in the conventional sense. High cheekbones, olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold depths of midnight. But it was the wariness in those eyes that struck him most forcefully, the way she seemed to assess him while maintaining a careful distance. "Mr. Redford." Her voice was low, cultured, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Thank you for meeting me." "My pleasure, ma'am." He gestured awkwardly toward his horse. "I brought the wagon. Figured you'd have luggage. Only this." She indicated her small case and a single trunk the driver was unloading. "I travel light." The ride back to the ranch passed mostly in silence. Elena sat rigidly on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, that shawl still covering her hair despite the afternoon heat. Luke tried to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, explaining about the ranch, but her responses were polite monosyllables. He noticed how she flinched slightly when the wagon hit a rut, how her eyes constantly scanned the horizon as if watching for something, or someone. The ranch house seemed to relax her slightly. She walked through the rooms with quiet approval, running her fingers along the surfaces Sarah had once polished, peering out the windows at the views. "It's well built," she said finally. "Solid. My late wife had a hand in the design," Luke admitted. "She wanted it to last." Elena's eyes softened slightly. She had good instincts. A home should be a fortress against the world. It was an odd way to phrase it, but Luke let it pass. He showed her to what would be her room, Sarah's sewing room, which he'd cleared and furnished with a proper bed and dresser. Elena set down her case with visible relief. "If it's all right with you," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'd like to rest before supper. The journey was tiring." "Of course. Take all the time you need." Luke retreated to the kitchen, his mind churning. She wasn't what he'd expected, though he couldn't say exactly what that had been. There was something guarded about Elena Morrison, something that went beyond the natural nervousness of a woman meeting her potential husband for the first time. As he prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, he heard her moving in her room, the creak of floorboards, the soft splash of water from the basin. When she emerged an hour later, she'd changed into a different dress, equally concealing, and pinned her dark hair into a severe bun. Even so, she looked more at ease, some of the tension gone from her shoulders. "Can I help?" she asked from the doorway. "Just about ready, though if you're of a mind, there's coffee on the stove." She poured 2 cups without being asked, adding a touch of sugar to each. It was a small gesture, but it spoke of consideration, of a willingness to try. They ate quietly, the silence not entirely uncomfortable. Elena complimented the food, asked about the ranch's water supply, the distance to town, practical questions that suggested she was already thinking like a rancher's wife. As night fell and the desert cold crept in, Luke built up the fire in the main room. Elena sat near it, her face thoughtful in the flickering light. She'd removed her shawl finally, revealing hair black as crow feathers, twisted and pinned with practiced efficiency. "I should be honest with you, Mr. Redford," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I may not be what you were hoping for." Luke studied her profile, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers twisted in her lap. I'm not sure I was hoping for anything specific. Miss Morrison. Just someone willing to make a life out here. She turned to look at him then, those dark eyes holding depths of pain he recognized all too well. Even if that someone carries difficulties? We all carry something, Luke said quietly. The territory has a way of wearing down sharp edges. She nodded slowly. Some decision made behind those careful eyes. But when she rose to retire for the night, Luke noticed how she hugged the walls, how her hand trailed along them as if needing the reassurance of something solid. That first night, he heard her moving in her room, pacing perhaps, or standing at the window. Once, he thought he heard her speaking, but the words weren't English, something liquid and unfamiliar that raised the hair on his neck. He lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what sorrows had driven Elena Morrison across a continent to this lonely corner of the world, and whether his own loneliness had led him to make a terrible mistake. But when morning came and he found her already up, coffee made and breakfast started, her smile tentative but genuine, he decided that some chances were worth taking. The territory was hard enough on those who faced it alone. Perhaps together, they might find something better than mere survival. Perhaps they might even find home. The weeks that followed settled into a careful routine. Elena proved herself capable and hard-working. Rising before dawn to tend the chickens Luke hadn't even realized needed tending, mending clothes he'd worn threadbare, and cooking meals that reminded him what real food tasted like. She moved through the ranch house like a shadow, quiet and efficient, always keeping that careful distance between them. Luke noticed the small things first, how she never turned her back to an open door, how she startled at sudden movements, her whole body tensing like a deer scenting wolves, how she wore those high-necked dresses even when sweat beaded on her forehead from the kitchen heat. When they worked together, she holding fence posts while he hammered, or helping drive cattle to water, she was competent but wary, never letting him closer than arm's length. The people of Cedar Falls took notice when Luke brought her to town for supplies. Women whispered behind their fans, while men tipped their hats with knowing smirks. Elena kept her eyes down, her shawl pulled tight, speaking only when spoken to. But Luke saw how her knuckles whitened as she gripped the wagon seat, how relief washed over her features when they left the town behind. They mean no harm, Luke offered as they rode home. The wagon loaded with flour and coffee and fabric Elena had carefully selected. I know, she replied softly, but meaning and doing are different things. One evening, as spring warmed toward summer, Luke was teaching her to handle his rifle, despite her initial reluctance. She'd agreed that a woman alone on a ranch should know how to shoot. Her stance was awkward, the rifle heavy in her slim arms. Here, Luke said, stepping behind her to adjust her grip. You need to. The moment his chest touched her back, Elena went rigid. A sound escaped her throat, not quite a scream, more like a wounded animal's cry. She dropped the rifle and spun away, pressing herself against the barn wall, her eyes wide and unseeing. Elena? Luke kept his voice low, his hands visible. It's all right. It's just me. She blinked rapidly, awareness returning to her features. Her face flushed with embarrassment. Forgive me, I'm not accustomed to. She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. No forgiveness needed, Luke said quietly. He picked up the rifle, checked it over. We'll try again another day. That night, he heard her crying, muffled sobs that carried through the thin walls. He lay in his bed, fists clenched, wanting to comfort her but knowing his presence would only make things worse. Whatever had happened to Elena Morrison had left wounds that ran soul deep. The nightmare came during a thunderstorm. Luke woke to screaming, raw, terrified sounds that had him out of bed before he was fully awake. He found Elena thrashing in her bed, tangled in the sheets, crying out in that liquid language he'd heard before. Without thinking, he reached for her shoulder. Her eyes flew open, but she wasn't seeing him. With surprising strength, she struck out, catching him across the jaw. Then she scrambled backward until she hit the wall, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself small. No more, she gasped in English. Please, no more. Elena. Luke kept his voice steady despite his racing heart. You're safe. You're in Arizona, on the ranch. You're safe. Slowly, so slowly, recognition dawned. She stared at him, at the room, at her own hands, as if surprised to find them unmarked. Luke? Yeah, it's me. I hurt you. She reached toward his face, then pulled back. I've had worse from ornery cattle. He tried for lightness. Bad dream. She nodded, still trembling. The storm. It sounds like... She shook her head. I'm sorry I woke you. Don't apologize. He stood carefully. I'll make some coffee. In the kitchen. He heated water and measured grounds, giving her time to compose herself. When she emerged, wrapped in a shawl over her nightgown, she looked younger, more vulnerable. They sat at the table as rain hammered the windows. I wasn't always like this, she said finally. I used to be normal. Luke studied his coffee. Normal's overrated in the territory. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Then, haltingly, she began to speak. My family had a small ranch in Texas. Nothing like this, just a few acres, some cattle. I was 18 when they came. Her voice was carefully neutral, as if she were telling someone else's story. Apache raiders. They killed my parents, my brother, took me and 2 other girls from neighboring ranches. Luke's hands tightened on his cup, but he didn't interrupt. The other girls died within the first year. They couldn't adapt, but She touched her temple. I learned to survive. Their language, their ways. I became... She paused, searching for words. I was given to a warrior named Kanta, as his woman. The kitchen fell silent except for the rain. Luke felt rage building in his chest. Not at her, never at her, but at the cruelty of the world that had broken this gentle woman. 5 years, she continued. 5 years before the army raided the camp. They found me and thought they were saving me, but I didn't. I couldn't go back to what I was before. My family was dead, and the marks... She touched her wrist where the dress covered it. No decent man would have me. You're wrong about that, Luke said roughly. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Am I? You haven't seen... You don't know. I know enough. She stood abruptly. You know words, stories. You haven't seen the proof written on my skin, the ceremonies they... Her voice broke. I should go back to bed. Elena, wait. But she was already gone, her door closing with quiet finality. The next morning brought awkwardness. Elena wouldn't meet his eyes, burying herself in chores. Luke wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap her confession had created. But words failed him. Instead, he did what he knew, worked the ranch, fixed what was broken, and gave her the space she seemed to need. Town became unavoidable when they ran low on supplies. Luke noticed Elena pulling her sleeves down repeatedly, checking that her collar was high. In the general store, Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, made a point of staring. That's an interesting accent your wife has. Mr. Redford, she said. Her tone suggesting interesting meant suspicious. She's from Texas, originally. Luke replied evenly. Is that so? And her people? Morrison, was it? I don't recall any Morrisons from Texas. Elena's hand found Luke's arm, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him in public. My maiden name, Mrs. Henderson. I'm a Redford now. The lie came so easily it took Luke a moment to realize what she'd done. They weren't married, not legally, but her claim hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. Of course. How sudden. Outside. Elena's composure cracked. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry, You did right, Luke interrupted. Let them think what they want. But we're not... you haven't... Elena... He stopped walking, turned to face her. Would you marry me? For real? She stared at him, something flickering in those dark eyes. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to be my wife, legal and proper. Even knowing what I am, what was done to me? You're a survivor, Luke said firmly. That's what you are. The rest is just history. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena slowly rolled up her sleeve. Luke's breath caught. The marks on her forearm were intricate, deliberate, geometric patterns that seemed to dance in the firelight. They were beautiful and terrible at once. This means I belong to the Eagle clan, she said quietly. This one marks me as a wife. This, she touched a series of dots. The children I lost. Luke reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he traced one finger along the patterns, feeling the raised skin. Do they hurt? Not anymore. Her voice was barely a whisper. Not the way you mean. He rolled up his own sleeve, showing a puckered scar along his forearm. Caught a bullet in the war, this one. He pointed to another mark. Is from a knife fight in Tucson. We all carry our history. Elena, yours is just more visible. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I dream in Apache sometimes. I cook their food when I think you're not watching. I can track better than I can embroider. And I know 13 ways to kill a man with my bare hands. Is that really what you want for a wife? I want you, Luke said simply. However you come. She studied his face for a long moment. The minister will refuse us. When he sees, there's a judge in Tucson who'll marry anyone with the fee. To hell with Reverend Henderson. People will talk. Let him. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. She was quiet so long he thought she'd refuse. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. Yes. That night, for the first time, she let him hold her as she cried. For the girl she'd been, the years she'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, for the hope she'd found, Luke held on tight, his own eyes burning, and swore silently that he'd spend whatever time they had proving that some men kept their promises, that some touches could heal instead of harm. The storm passed, leaving the desert washed clean, and in a small ranch house, two broken people began the slow work of building something whole. The morning they left for Tucson, Elena emerged from her room transformed. She'd pinned her hair differently, softer somehow, and though she still wore a high-necked dress, there was something lighter in her bearing. Luke had polished his boots and trimmed his beard, looking more nervous than he'd ever seen him facing down cattle thieves or rattlesnakes. You clean up well, Mr. Redford, she said, a hint of teasing in her voice that he'd never heard before. You look beautiful. Elena. The words came out rougher than intended, but they were true. In the early morning light, with hope softening her features, she took his breath away. The 2-day journey to Tucson passed in comfortable conversation, away from Cedar Falls' judging eyes. Elena relaxed, even laughing when Luke told stories of his early ranching disasters. She shared memories too, not of her captivity, but of before. Her mother's rose garden, her father teaching her to read from his prized Bible. Small, precious fragments of the girl she'd been. Judge Morrison, no relation despite the name, was a practical man who'd married dozens of couples with questionable backgrounds. He barely glanced at Elena's carefully covered arms, took their fee, and performed the ceremony in his dusty office. When he pronounced them man and wife, Luke hesitated, unsure. Elena solved the problem by rising on her toes and pressing a quick, sweet kiss to his cheek. There, she whispered. Official. They stayed the night in Tucson, in separate rooms at the boarding house. Elena's choice, and Luke didn't push, but at dinner in the hotel restaurant. She reached across the table and took his hand, their wedding rings catching the lamplight. The ride home felt different. Elena sat closer on the wagon seat, occasionally leaning against his shoulder when the road got rough. As they crested the last hill before the ranch, she said quietly, I want to try, Luke, to be a real wife, but I need time. All the time you need, he assured her. We've got nothing but time. Those first weeks of marriage were a delicate dance. Elena moved her few belongings into Luke's room but made a pallet on the floor. Luke protested, offering to take the floor himself, but she shook her head. I need to know I can leave, she explained, not meeting his eyes. It's not about you. It's about... being able to choose. So Luke lay in his bed, achingly aware of her presence below, listening to her breathing slowly even out each night. Sometimes she had nightmares, and he'd whisper her name until she woke, grounding her in the present. Sometimes she'd reach up and take his hand, holding on until dawn. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. They'd ridden out to check the eastern boundary, where spring runoff had damaged some fencing. The work was hard and hot, and they'd stripped down to essentials, Luke to his shirt sleeves, Elena to a lighter blouse she'd made herself, though still long-sleeved despite the heat. They were almost done when the storm hit. Desert storms came fast and violent, and this one caught them in the open. Lightning split the sky as rain turned the ground to mud in seconds. Luke grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her toward an outcropping of rocks he knew had a shallow cave. They tumbled inside just as hail began to fall, white stones bouncing off the rocks like bullets. The cave was small, barely room for 2 people. They pressed against the back wall, soaked and shivering. The storm a gray curtain across the entrance. "Just like the night we met," Elena said, teeth chattering. "You and storms." Luke pulled off his vest, wrapping it around her shoulders. She leaned into him, seeking warmth, and suddenly they were closer than they'd ever been. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid as a bird's. "Elena," he breathed. She looked up at him, water dripping from her hair, and something shifted in her eyes. Fear, yes, but something else too. Want, maybe, or trust. "I'm so tired of being afraid," she whispered. "You don't have to be, not with me." She studied his face for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, began unbuttoning her cuff. "I want to show you, all of it, so you know. So you can still choose. Elena, you don't have to." "I do." She rolled up one sleeve, then the other. The marks continued up her arms, eagles in flight, geometric patterns, symbols he couldn't read. "There's more, on my back, my shoulders." She touched her collar. "Here." Luke caught her hands gently. "I see you, Elena, all of you, and I choose you, today, tomorrow, always." She made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and then she was kissing him. Not the careful pecks they'd shared since marriage, but something desperate and hungry and alive. Luke responded carefully, letting her lead, even as every instinct screamed to pull her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena's eyes were bright with tears. "I don't know how to be a wife anymore. Not in the bedroom. They taught me things, but it wasn't about love. It was about survival. Then we'll learn together," Luke said firmly. "No expectations, no demands, just us." The storm raged for another hour. They stayed pressed together, talking quietly, hands exploring carefully over clothes. When Elena traced the scar on Luke's jaw, when he pressed his lips to her temple, it felt like more intimacy than he'd ever known. By the time they rode home, something fundamental had changed. That night, Elena climbed into the bed beside him. They lay facing each other, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth between them. "Tell me about your first kiss," Elena said into the darkness. Luke chuckled. "Mary Patterson, behind the schoolhouse. I was 13 and stepped on her foot." "Romantic." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Mine was Thomas Miller. He tasted like peppermint sticks." They traded stories. Innocent, sweet memories from before life got complicated. And when Elena finally fell asleep, her hand found his across the space between them. The progression was slow, measured in small victories. The first time Elena let him see her marks in full daylight. The first time she came to him after a nightmare instead of suffering alone. The first night she let him hold her as they slept, her back pressed to his chest, his arm careful around her waist. Cedar Falls noticed the change too. Elena walked taller, met people's eyes. "When Mrs. Henderson made another snide comment about foreign influences. Elena responded with such perfectly polite devastation that the minister's wife retreated in confusion. Luke had to hide his grin in his coffee cup. "You're enjoying this too much," Elena scolded, but her eyes danced. "My wife's got spine. Man's allowed to be proud. My wife. The words still felt like a miracle. The full truth of their marriage came one evening in late summer. They'd spent the day working together, easy as breathing now, and were watching the sunset from the porch. Elena sat between Luke's knees, his arms around her, both of them dusty and tired and content. "I want to try," she said suddenly. "Tonight, to be together." Luke's hand stilled on her arms. "Elena, we don't have to." She turned in his embrace, facing him. "I know. That's why I want to. Because with you, it's a choice. My choice." That night, by lamplight, she showed him all of her marks. He kissed each one, murmuring words of love and acceptance until she cried. When they came together at last, it was with a tenderness that bordered on worship. Elena wept afterward, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming realization that her body was her own again. That touch could mean love instead of ownership. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not what was done to me. Not the marks or the past. Just me." Luke pulled her closer, marveling at the trust she'd given him. "You're the strongest person I know. Elena Redford, and the most beautiful." She laughed, soft and wondering. "Say it again." "Which part?" "My name. Elena Redford," he said firmly. "My wife, my love, my choice." They fell asleep tangled together, the pallet on the floor forgotten. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, and the stars wheeled overhead. And in a small ranch house, two people who'd thought themselves too broken for love discovered they'd been wrong. The scars remained. They always would. But in the space between two hearts, they found something stronger than fear, deeper than pain. They found home. The autumn brought a sweet routine to their days. Elena had transformed the ranch house into a true home. Curtains at the windows, herbs growing in boxes, the smell of fresh bread every morning. She worked beside Luke with an easy competence, no longer flinching at his touch, often seeking it out. When he came in from the fields, she'd press against him, dusty clothes and all, claiming her welcome kiss with a proprietary air that never failed to make his heart race. Cedar Falls, however, was less accepting of their happiness. The whispers had grown louder since their marriage, especially after Elena had stopped hiding her marks completely. She still dressed modestly, but no longer wore gloves in the heat or kept her sleeves buttoned at the wrists. The glimpses of her tattoos sent the gossips into overdrive. It started small. The general store began running out of items Elena needed. The blacksmith took twice as long with Luke's orders. Women crossed the street to avoid speaking to them. Luke's jaw grew tight with suppressed anger, but Elena seemed strangely unaffected. "I've survived worse than small-minded people," she told him one evening, working on a new shirt for him. "Let them whisper." But the situation escalated when a new arrival came to town, a half-Apache scout named Samuel Redhawk, who worked as an interpreter for the army. He was in the general store when Luke and Elena entered, and his eyes immediately fixed on the visible marks on Elena's wrist. His face went carefully blank, but Luke caught the recognition in his gaze. "Ma'am," Redhawk said quietly in English, tipping his hat. Then, so soft Luke almost missed it, he added something in Apache. Elena went rigid. Her hand found Luke's arm, gripping tight enough to hurt. She replied in the same language, her voice steady but strained. Redhawk's eyes widened slightly, and he gave a deeper nod before quickly leaving the store. "What did he say?" Luke asked once they were back in the wagon. Elena was pale beneath her tan. He recognized the clan marks, said he knew of Kanta, that he was sorry for my loss. "Your loss?" She looked away. "The children, the ones I couldn't carry to term. It's considered a great sorrow among the people." Luke's throat tightened. She'd mentioned the marks before, but hadn't elaborated. "Elena, 3, she said quietly. 3 times and each time, part of me was grateful, because what life would a child have in that situation, and part of me mourned, because they were still mine." She touched her stomach unconsciously. The medicine woman said the repeated losses might have damaged things. I may never be able to give you children. Luke. He pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road, turning to face her fully. You are enough. Elena, just you, always. She studied his face, then leaned in to kiss him, deep and desperate. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. Take me home, she whispered. But home offered no refuge from the town's judgment. 2 nights later, they woke to the sound of breaking glass. Luke grabbed his rifle and ran outside to find their front windows shattered, burning rags thrown inside. He and Elena worked frantically to put out the small fires before they could spread. Animals, Luke spat, surveying the damage. Cowardly animals. Elena stood amid the broken glass, still in her nightgown, looking smaller than he'd seen her in months. This is my fault. They found out what I am, and now— Don't. Luke pulled her against him. Don't you dare blame yourself for their ignorance. Sheriff Patterson arrived at dawn, looking uncomfortable. Heard you had some trouble. Windows don't break themselves. Sheriff, Luke said coldly. No witnesses, no proof. Patterson shifted his weight. Look, Redford, I'm not saying it's right, but people are scared. That scout's been talking, says your woman has Apache clan marks. Says she was a warrior's woman. Folk remember the raids. Lost family. She lost family too, Luke interrupted. Or doesn't that count because of what happened after? Patterson had the grace to look ashamed. I'm just saying, might be easier if you two kept distance from town for a while. You mean, let them drive us out? I mean, let tempers cool. After Patterson left, Luke found Elena packing her few belongings. What are you doing? Leaving. Her voice was flat, emotionless. You were happy here before I came. You had respect, friends. I won't take that from you. Luke crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling the clothes from her hands. You're not going anywhere. Luke. No, you're my wife. This is your home. We don't run. And if they come back, if next time they don't stop at windows, then we defend what's ours. He caught her face between his hands. Together. She searched his eyes, then slowly nodded. That afternoon, they rode to town together, back straight, rifle visible in the wagon. Luke needed supplies to fix the windows, and he'd be damned if he'd let fear keep them away. The general store was fuller than usual, conversation stopping as they entered. Luke ignored the stares, going about his business. But at the counter, Mrs. Henderson stepped directly into Elena's path. You have some nerve showing your face here, the minister's wife hissed. Parading your heathen marks, corrupting a good Christian man? Judge not, lest you be judged. Elena quoted calmly. Matthew 7:1. Or does your Bible have different verses than mine? Mrs. Henderson's face went red. You dare quote scripture? You, who laid with savages? The store went deadly quiet. Luke started forward, but Elena's hand stopped him. She stepped closer to Mrs. Henderson, her voice carrying clearly. I survived 5 years of captivity. I endured things that would have broken you in 5 minutes. I learned their language, their ways, because adaptation meant survival. I carry these marks not with pride, but not with shame either. They are proof that I lived when everything tried to kill me. She lifted her chin. Can you say the same about your comfortable life? Mrs. Henderson, what have you survived besides gossip and tea parties? You're nothing but a survivor, Luke interrupted, moving to stand beside his wife. A woman of courage and strength, and if any of you have issue with that, you can take it up with me. His hand rested on his gun belt, a clear warning. Several men looked away. Tom Morrison from the feed store cleared his throat. No call for trouble. Luke, we all got history, some more visible than others. Elena added quietly. They left with their supplies, the silence following them out. But as they loaded the wagon, old Samuel Martinez, who ran the livery, approached. Senora, he said quietly. My wife, she was taken by Comanche when she was young. Came back, changed, but still my Rosa. Still the woman I loved. He pressed a small wrapped package into Elena's hands. For you. It was soap, good quality, scented with lavender. Elena's eyes filled. Gracias, señor. De nada. You come by sometime. Rosa. She would like to meet you, I think. A crack in the wall of hostility. Luke squeezed Elena's hand as they drove home. That night, as they lay together, Elena traced patterns on Luke's chest. Would you really fight the whole town for me? Every last one, he said without hesitation. She was quiet for a long moment. I used to dream of escape, every night for 5 years, but somewhere along the way, the dreams changed. I stopped dreaming of my old life and started dreaming of something new. Someone who would see past the marks to who I still was inside. She propped herself up to look at him. I never imagined you, Luke Redford. Never dreamed someone like you existed. I'm nothing special. She silenced him with a kiss. You are to me. They made love slowly, tenderly. Elena tracing his scars as he traced hers, mapping the geography of survival on each other's skin. Afterward, as thunder rumbled in the distance promising rain, Luke held her close and made silent vows. Let them come, he thought. Let them bring their torches and their hate. He'd spent 3 years in this house learning to live with loneliness. Now he'd learned something better, how to live with love, and he'd die before he let anyone take that from them. The storm broke just before dawn, washing the desert clean, and in their bed, 2 survivors held each other and planned for battles yet to come, knowing that together, they could weather anything. The rider appeared on the horizon at midday, when the desert heat made the air shimmer like water. Luke was mending a harness in the barn when Elena's voice, tight with fear, called him outside. She stood on the porch, one hand shading her eyes, the other gripping the doorframe. Someone's coming, she said, alone. As the figure drew closer, Luke saw it was an Apache warrior, riding without haste, weapons visible but not drawn. The man's face was weathered but not old, perhaps 35, with the kind of stillness that spoke of contained power. Elena made a sound, not quite a gasp, more like all the air leaving her lungs at once. Kanta, she whispered. Luke's hand found his rifle, but Elena touched his arm. No, let me speak with him. The warrior stopped his horse a respectful distance from the house, his dark eyes moving from Elena to Luke and back again. When he spoke, his voice was deep, speaking in accented but clear English. Elena, you look well. She stepped forward, Luke close behind. Why are you here? Word travels. Red Hawk spoke of seeing you in the white man's town, of seeing our marks on your skin. His gaze flicked to Luke. This is your man now? My husband, Elena said firmly. Luke Redford. Kanta studied Luke for a long moment, then nodded slightly. I am Kanta, of the Eagle clan. I come in peace. State your business, Luke said, not loosening his grip on the rifle. I come to see that she lives, that she is... He searched for words. Treated well. Elena's laugh was bitter. Now you care about my treatment? Something flickered in Kanta's eyes. I mourned you, woman. When the soldiers came, when they took you, I searched. 3 moons I searched. They told me you were dead. I might as well have been. You lived. You survived. This is not nothing. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. May we speak? As we once did. Elena glanced at Luke, who nodded reluctantly. She gestured to the shade of the porch. Water your horse. We'll talk. As Kanta tended his mount, Elena gripped Luke's hands. I need to do this, but stay close. Always. They sat on the porch, Luke standing guard while Elena and Kanta spoke, at first in English, then slipping into Apache when the words came easier. Luke couldn't understand the language, but he could read Elena's body, the way she went from rigid to resigned, occasionally gesturing at her arms where the marks showed. After what felt like hours, but was perhaps 30 minutes, Kanta stood. He looked at Luke directly. You are good to her? She's my wife, Luke said simply. I'd die for her. Dying is easy. Living is hard. Kanta turned back to Elena. The young warriors speak of reclaiming what was stolen. I tell them you chose your path, but some, he shrugged, young men do not always listen to wisdom. Are you threatening us? Luke stepped forward. Warning. Kanta corrected. I have no claim here. She was my wife by our law, but she walks a different path now. I accept this. I came only to see for myself that she lives freely. He mounted his horse, then looked down at Elena one last time. The children we lost, I mourned them too. Elena's composure cracked slightly. Kanta, be well. Elena of the Eagle Clan, may your new path bring what the old one could not. He nodded to Luke. Guard her well. White man, she has survived much. She deserves peace. He rode away without looking back, disappearing into the heat shimmer as if he'd never been. Elena stood frozen until Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind. She turned in his embrace, burying her face against his chest. I thought I'd feel more, she said, muffled against his shirt. Anger or fear or something, but mostly I just feel tired. Come inside. Rest. She shook her head. He said young warriors might come. We need to prepare. They spent the afternoon checking weapons, securing the property. Elena showed Luke things he'd never considered, how to spot signs of approach, where the blind spots were around the ranch. Her knowledge was practical, earned through hard experience. You'd have made a good soldier, Luke commented, watching her sight down a rifle with practiced ease. I was a soldier, she replied quietly, just not by choice. That night, they took turns keeping watch. The desert was quiet except for the usual sounds. Coyotes, wind through the mesquite, but there was a tension in the air, a waiting quality that had Luke's nerves on edge. Tell me about him, Luke said during Elena's watch. Kanta. She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. He wasn't cruel, not the way you might think. He was practical. I was a prize, proof of his success as a warrior, but also a burden, a white woman who couldn't speak the language, didn't know the ways. She paused. He taught me to survive, not out of kindness, but because my dying would reflect poorly on him. Did you ever... Luke stopped, not sure how to ask. Love him? Elena finished. No. I learned to not hate him, which was its own kind of survival. But love? Love requires choice. Luke, I had none. They were lucky for 3 days. Then, just before dawn on the 4th, the attack came. Luke woke to the sound of horses, many of them, and Elena already reaching for the rifle beside their bed. How many? He asked, pulling on his boots. 6, maybe 7. Her voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. Young ones, from the way they ride. They took positions at different windows, weapons ready. The warriors circled the house, whooping and firing arrows that thudded into the walls. One torched arrow caught the barn roof, but Luke had soaked everything with water in preparation. They're testing us, Elena called out. Looking for weakness. A warrior rode close, paint obscuring his features. And Luke fired, deliberately missing but close enough to make his point. The Apache wheeled away, shouting something. What did he say? That I'm a betrayer, that I should return to where I belong. Elena's rifle cracked, and a warrior's horse screamed. Hit in the flank. The rider went down hard, his companions pulling him up behind another mount. The attack intensified, bullets now mixing with arrows. Luke counted his ammunition, knowing they couldn't hold out forever. Then Elena did something that surprised him. She began to sing. It was an Apache death song, her voice carrying clear and strong over the chaos. The attack faltered. She stepped into view at the window, still singing, her rifle lowered but ready. When the song ended, she called out in Apache, her voice ringing with authority. The silence stretched taut. Then one of the warriors responded, sounding younger than Luke had expected. Elena replied, and what followed was clearly an argument, though Luke couldn't understand the words. Finally, she switched to English. I am Elena of the Eagle Clan. marked by right of survival. I have chosen my path. This man is my husband by his law and yours. I went to him freely, stay with him freely. You dishonor yourselves and Kanta with this attack. Go home, young ones. There is no glory here. More silence. Then, incredibly, the warriors began to withdraw. They collected their wounded companion and rode away. Not in defeat, but in something like acknowledgement. Elena sagged against the window frame. "It's over," she said. "They won't come back." "How can you be sure?" "Because I invoked Kanta's name, challenged their honor. They're young, but not stupid. They'll go back and report that I'm where I choose to be." She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd forgotten the death song, but it came back, like my hands knew the rifle. Some things get carved too deep to forget." Luke pulled her close. "You saved us." "We saved us," she corrected. Then, with a shaky laugh, "Although I think I terrified them when I started singing." The death song is supposed to be sung by warriors facing their end, not women defending their homes. "You are a warrior," Luke said firmly. "My warrior." Dawn revealed the damage, arrows bristling from walls, bullet holes in the shutters Luke had installed after the window-breaking incident. But the ranch stood. They had held. Word of the attack reached Cedar Falls by noon, carried by a traveler who'd seen the smoke. Sheriff Patterson arrived with a posse, ready to pursue, but Elena stopped them. "It's finished," she told them. "They came, we defended, they left. That's the end of it." "You can't know that," Patterson argued. Elena lifted her chin. Every inch the woman who'd faced down warriors. "I know their ways. Sheriff, this wasn't a raid, it was a challenge. I met it. Honor is satisfied." The posse exchanged uncertain looks. It was one thing to whisper about the woman with Apache marks. It was another to see her standing there, rifle in hand, calmly discussing warrior honor like she'd been born to it. Tom Morrison cleared his throat. "Maybe she's right. Sheriff, no call to stir up more trouble if it's settled." Others nodded agreement. Luke saw something shift in their faces, if not acceptance, then at least a wary respect. Elena had defended her home like any rancher's wife. That was something they understood. As the posse prepared to leave, Samuel Martinez approached. "My Rosa. She wants to know, would you come to dinner Sunday? After church?" Elena's eyes widened slightly. An invitation to Sunday dinner was no small thing. "We'd be honored," she said. That night, as they worked together to remove arrows and patch bullet holes, Elena suddenly laughed. "What?" Luke asked. "I was just thinking. Most women worry about their husband meeting their fathers. You had to meet my former Apache husband and fight off a war party." "Worth it," Luke said, kissing her forehead. "Every arrow, every bullet. Worth it to see you singing down warriors like some ancient goddess." She leaned into him. "I choose this. Luke, every day. I choose this life, this home. You. They can't take that from me. No one can." Under the vast desert stars, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to their hard-won peace, knowing that some battles end not in defeat or victory, but in understanding. The weeks following the attack brought an unexpected peace. True to Elena's prediction, no more warriors came. The town's attitude shifted too, not to warmth exactly, but to a grudging respect. Elena had defended her home, stood her ground. In the frontier, that counted for something. Sunday dinner at the Martinez house broke the ice further. Rosa Martinez was a small, bird-like woman with kind eyes and her own hidden scars. She and Elena spoke quietly in the corner while the men discussed cattle prices. Two women who understood survival in ways their husbands never quite could. "It gets easier," Rosa told Elena softly. "The memories fade, not disappear, but soften." "How long?" Elena asked. 20 years for me, but the nightmares stopped after 10. Rosa patted Elena's hand. "You're stronger than I was. You have the marks. I was too afraid to let them. Pretended it never happened. You wear your truth." As autumn deepened toward winter, Luke suggested something that surprised them both. Let's go up to the mountains for a few days. Just us, like a proper honeymoon. Elena's eyes lit up. Can we afford to leave the ranch? Tom Morrison offered to check on things. Said it was the least he could do after... Luke shrugged. The man had been one of the most vocal against Elena initially. Guilt was a powerful motivator. They packed supplies on 2 horses and rode north into the Chiricahua Mountains. The desert gave way to pine forests and hidden valleys where water ran clear and cold. Luke had trapped up here in his younger days and knew of a cabin, abandoned but still solid. It's perfect. Elena breathed when she saw it, a one-room structure tucked against a cliff face, with a stream running nearby and meadow grass growing tall. They spent their days exploring, hunting, gathering the last of the season's berries. Elena showed Luke plants the Apache used for medicine, while he taught her to read the weather signs in cloud formations. At night, they made love with an abandon that would have been impossible at the ranch, where the walls were thin and the desert carried sound. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside the cabin, Elena began to speak about things she'd never shared before. There was a woman in the clan, Sageflower. She was kind to me when others weren't, taught me their women's ways, helped me understand why. She touched her belly. Why I lost the babies. She said sometimes a body knows when the time isn't right, when bringing life would only bring suffering. Luke pulled her closer. Wise woman. I hated her for saying it then. Now. Elena stared into the flames. She was trying to give me peace about something that had none. After the 3rd loss, Kanta stopped, visiting me that way. Said I was cursed, that my womb rejected Apache children because I wasn't truly one of them. Bastard? Luke growled. No, Elena said thoughtfully. It was a kindness. In its way, he could have cast me out, given me to others. Instead, he kept me but didn't touch me. I became something between wife and servant. It was easier. They were quiet, watching sparks rise into the star-filled sky. Then Elena turned to straddle Luke's lap, her hands framing his face. I want to try, she whispered. For a child. With you? I know I might not be able, but... Elena, I dream about it sometimes. A little girl with your eyes. A boy with your stubborn chin. Teaching them to ride, to read, to survive. Good dreams, not nightmares. She kissed him deeply. Make love to me. Luke, not careful, not holding back, like we're trying to create something. Under the vast mountain sky, with pine scent sharp in the air and wolves howling in the distance. They came together with desperate hope. Elena cried afterward, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming feeling of possibility, of a future that might hold more than just survival. They stayed in the mountains a full week, returning to the ranch sun-browned and closer than ever. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the desert in pristine white. Elena stood at the window watching it fall, one hand pressed to her stomach in an unconscious gesture Luke was seeing more often. My monthly bleeding is late, she told him one morning in December, her voice carefully neutral. How late? 2 weeks. She turned to face him. It's been late before, when I was... Before, it never meant anything. But by January, when her belly began to round despite the morning sickness that left her weak, they couldn't deny the truth. Elena was with child. Dr. Morrison, also no relation to Tom, confirmed it during a house visit, his manner professional despite the visible marks on Elena's arms as he examined her. Everything seems normal, he said, though given your history, we'll need to be watchful. Bed rest in the final months. Certainly. I've lost 3, Elena told him bluntly. What are the chances? The doctor's face softened. Every pregnancy is different. Mrs. Redford, you're healthy, well-nourished, and most importantly, you're in a safe environment now. The body knows the difference. After he left, Elena sat on the bed, both hands curved around her still small belly. I'm terrified, she admitted. Luke sat beside her, covering her hands with his. So am I, But we'll face it together, like everything else. The pregnancy progressed through winter into spring. Elena bloomed with it, her face gaining a fullness that made her look younger. She sang Apache lullabies to her belly, mixed with the hymns from her childhood. The combination should have been strange, but from Elena's lips, it sounded like a prayer for protection in 2 languages. Town opinion remained divided, but Rosa Martinez organized a quilting bee for the baby, pointedly inviting Elena. 6 women showed up, not many, but enough to matter. As they stitched, Elena told sanitized stories of Apache children, how they were carried on cradle boards, how they learned to walk. The women listened with fascination despite themselves. "They're people, old Mrs.," Garrett said suddenly. "The way you tell it, they're just people." "Yes," Elena agreed simply. "Different ways, same hearts." Spring brought its own challenges. Elena's belly grew round and heavy, making ranch work impossible. Luke hired Tom Morrison's eldest boy to help, the teenager wide-eyed at working for the woman with the Apache marks, but eager for the wages. One evening in April, as Elena struggled to find a comfortable position, she suddenly gripped Luke's arm. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "It's too early, but—" The pain that followed had her crying out, clutching her belly. Luke rode hard for town, returning with Dr. Morrison and, surprisingly, Rosa Martinez. "Sage flower taught me," Rosa said quietly, producing herbs from her bag. "For times like this." The next hours were a blur of pain and fear. Elena alternated between English and Apache, sometimes calling for her long-dead mother, sometimes for sage flower. Luke held her hand through it all, whispering prayers to any god that might listen. Then, just as dawn broke, the pain eased. Elena lay exhausted but whole, the baby still moving within her. "False labor, Doctor," Morrison said, relief evident. "But she needs complete rest now. No excitement, no strain. I lost the others this way." Elena whispered. "Started early, couldn't stop it. This one's a fighter," Rosa said firmly, "like the mother." The next weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Elena chafed at the enforced bed rest, but Luke was immovable. He carried her outside daily to sit in the shade, where she could watch the ranch life continue around her. The Morrison boy proved capable, and neighbors, even some who'd shunned them, stopped by with food and offers of help. On a blazing hot day in late May, Elena's water broke for real. This time, she laughed through the first pains. "It's different," she told Luke. "This is right. This is how it should feel." The labor was long but steady. Rosa Martinez stayed throughout, brewing teas, offering quiet encouragement. Dr. Morrison came and went, assuring them all was progressing normally. As another desert sunset painted the sky, Elena gave a final push and their daughter slid into the world, screaming with healthy lungs. Rosa cleaned her and placed her on Elena's chest, where she immediately quieted. "She's perfect," Luke breathed, touching the baby's dark hair with one trembling finger. "Sarah," Elena said firmly, "for your first wife, she made this home. It's right her name lives here." Luke's eyes filled. "Sarah Elena Redford, a child of 2 worlds," Rosa murmured. "May she bridge them." As if in agreement, little Sarah opened her eyes, not the cloudy blue of most newborns, but dark and alert like her mother's. She gazed up at her parents with what seemed like ancient wisdom, then yawned and settled to sleep. Outside, a desert owl called, and the first stars appeared. Inside the ranch house, a family that shouldn't have been possible held each other close. Proof that love could grow in the harshest ground, that happiness could be built on the ruins of sorrow, that sometimes the greatest rebellions were simply choosing joy in a world that expected you to accept defeat. Elena sang softly, an Apache blessing for a new child mixed with an old Spanish lullaby her own mother had sung. 2 cultures, 2 histories, woven into something new, something theirs, something beautiful. Little Sarah was 6 months old when the snows came early, blanketing the desert in unusual white. Elena had recovered fully from the birth, her strength returning along with a fierce protectiveness that reminded Luke of a mother wolf. The baby thrived, growing round and bright-eyed, her laughter filling the house that had been quiet for so long. They'd settled into a routine, Luke working the ranch while Elaine attended the baby and household, though she still helped when she could. Sarah secured to her back in a cradle board she'd made herself, Apache style. The sight had caused whispers in town, but Elena ignored them. "It's practical," she said simply, "and she sleeps better." The peace shattered on a bitter December morning. Luke had ridden to check the north pasture when he saw the smoke rising from the direction of home. His blood turned to ice. He spurred his horse hard, rifle ready, praying with every thundering hoofbeat. But it wasn't their ranch burning. As he crested the rise, he saw riders, 6 young Apache warriors, different from the ones before. They sat their horses in a semicircle before the house, where Elena stood on the porch, Sarah in her arms. Her rifle leaned against the doorframe, within reach but not threatening. Luke approached carefully, reading the scene. Elena was speaking in Apache, her voice calm but firm. The lead warrior, younger than the others with fresh scars on his chest, responded harshly. Luke caught Kanta's name several times. "What's happening?" Luke asked quietly, moving to stand beside his wife. "They say Kanta is dead," Elena translated, her voice steady though he could see the shock in her eyes. "Killed in a raid on a Mexican settlement. These are his brother's sons. They've come to—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "Settle his obligations." "What obligations?" The lead warrior spoke again, gesturing at Elena, at the baby, his meaning clear even without translation. "They say I belong to the clan, that without Kanta to release me, I should return, or at least—" Elena's arms tightened around Sarah. "The child should to be raised properly over my dead body," Luke growled. Reaching for his rifle, Elena stopped him with a look. "Let me handle this." She stepped forward, shifting Sarah to one arm while she rolled up her sleeve with deliberate motions. The clan mark stood out stark against her skin. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority Luke had only heard once before, when she'd sung down the previous war party. The Apache listened, some shifting uncomfortably. Elena gestured at the marks, at Sarah, at Luke, her words flowing like water over stone. Then she did something that made the warriors rear back. She pulled her dress aside to show the mark over her heart, speaking directly to the leader. Whatever she said, it had impact. The young warrior's face went pale beneath his paint. He argued, but weakly now. Elena stood firm, Sarah beginning to fuss in her arms, but her mother's stance never wavering. Finally, the leader raised his hand. He spoke formally, the others echoing certain phrases. Then, without another word, they wheeled their horses and rode away, not in anger, but in what looked like confused retreat. Elena sagged against the doorframe, Sarah now crying in earnest. Luke took the baby, soothing her while studying his wife's face. "What did you tell them?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "The mark over my heart, it's different from the others. Kanta put it there after the third baby died. It means—" She struggled for words. "Barren woman, cursed, unable to give the clan children. He marked me as outside the normal laws. Neither wife nor captive. A nothing." Luke's jaw clenched. "Bastard. But it saved me today," Elena continued. "I told them that Mark freed me from clan obligations before Kanta died, that this child," she touched Sarah's head gently, "was born of my choosing, not of duty, that she carries no Apache blood, has no place in their world." "Will they accept that?" The young one was shaken. The mark of barrenness is significant. To claim a barren woman who then bears children elsewhere brings terrible luck. She managed a weak smile. Sometimes their superstitions work in our favor. They went inside, Luke barring the door while Elena nursed Sarah. The baby settled quickly, unaware of how close she'd come to being taken. Luke built up the fire and made coffee, the normal action soothing. "We need to leave," Elena said suddenly. "Not forever, but for a while, until things settle with Kanta's clan." Luke had been thinking the same thing. "Where?" "California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere far from Apache territory. She looked around the room, at the home they'd built together. I don't want to go. This is our place. But Sarah, we protect her first. Luke agreed. Always. They spent the next days preparing quietly. Luke found buyers for most of the cattle, keeping only the best breeding stock. Tom Morrison agreed to watch the ranch for a share of future profits. It pained Luke to see the understanding in the man's eyes. He knew they might never return. 3 nights before they planned to leave, Rosa Martinez visited with her husband. Word travels, she said simply. About the warriors, about your decision. Elena nodded, busy packing dishes. We can't risk Sarah. No, Rosa agreed. But running forever is no life either. She pulled out a leather pouch. I've been saving this. Names, places, people like us, women who survived, made new lives, some in California, some further north. If you go to them, tell them Rosa sends you. They'll help. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She embraced the older woman. Thank you. We survive by helping each other, Rosa said simply. That's the only way. Samuel Martinez cleared his throat. There's a wagon train leaving from Tucson next week. Good people, heading to Sacramento. The wagon master owes me a favor. He'll take you on. No questions asked. Their last night in the ranch was bittersweet. Luke and Elena made love with desperate tenderness, trying to memorize each moment. Sarah slept between them afterward, blissfully unaware her whole world was about to change. We'll come back, Luke promised in the darkness. When she's older, when things have calmed, this is our home. Is it? Elena's voice was soft. Or is home just wherever we're together? He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. Both can be true. Dawn came too soon. They loaded the wagon carefully. Clothes, supplies, Elena's herbs, the quilt the women had made for Sarah. Luke took one last ride around the property, checking everything. When he returned, he found Elena standing in the doorway, Sarah on her hip, just looking. Memorizing? He asked. Saying goodbye. She touched the door frame. This house gave me my life back, gave us Sarah. I needed to know I'm grateful. They drove away as the sun climbed higher, not looking back. Luke heard Elena singing softly to Sarah, not Apache songs or Mexican lullabies, but something new, words she was making up as she went, a traveling song, a song of new beginnings. The wagon train welcomed them with minimal curiosity. Families heading west had their own stories, their own reasons for leaving. Elena kept her marks covered, presented herself as simply another pioneer wife. But at night, around the campfires, Luke saw her watching the children play, saw her hands unconsciously trace the hidden patterns on her skin. Regrets? He asked one evening as they camped by a clear stream. No, she said firmly. Never regrets. Just... She looked east, toward the mountains that hid their abandoned home. I thought I was done running, done being driven from place to place by other people's choices. This is our choice, Luke reminded her. To protect Sarah, that's different. Elena nodded, but he could see the cost in her eyes. She'd fought so hard to claim her place, to stand her ground. Leaving, even by choice, felt like defeat. That night, as the wagon train settled for sleep, a figure emerged from the darkness. Luke's hand went to his gun, but Elena stopped him. It was an old Apache woman, bent with age but moving with purpose. She spoke quietly to Elena, who listened with growing amazement. What is it? Luke asked when the woman melted back into the night. She's from a different clan. She heard about me, about the marks, about Sarah. Elena's voice was wondering. She came to tell me that Kanta's brother has forbidden any pursuit, that the mark of barrenness has been honored, that we're free. Just like that? The old woman said Kanta appeared to his brother in a dream, released me formally. Whether it's true or just a way to save face? Elena shrugged. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. Luke felt a weight lift from his chest. We could go back. No. Elena's response surprised him. Not yet. Maybe someday, but... She looked at the wagon train. at the families around them. Maybe this is meant to be a truly fresh start, where no one knows our story, where Sarah can grow up as just a child, not the daughter of the woman with Apache marks. Luke understood. The ranch would wait. Tom Morrison would tend it. And somewhere ahead, California or Oregon or wherever the trail led, a new life waited, one they'd build together, carrying their past but not chained to it, as if understanding. Sarah laughed in her sleep, one small hand clutching her mother's finger. Elena smiled down at her, then at Luke. Home is wherever we're together, she repeated. The rest is just details. The wagon train rolled on through the darkness, carrying them toward an uncertain future. But Luke felt no fear, only anticipation. They'd survived so much: loneliness, prejudice, violence, loss. Whatever waited ahead couldn't be harder than what lay behind. And they'd face it as they faced everything now, together, marked by love stronger than any ink could ever be. The wagon train had turned back 3 days ago, the wagon master declaring the route too dangerous with Apache raids increasing along the border. But Luke and Elena had pressed on alone, determined to reach Cedar Falls before the worst of winter set in. Sarah, now almost a year old, babbled happily in her mother's arms, unaware of the tension that gripped her parents. There, Luke pointed to smoke rising from familiar chimneys. Home. Elena's hand found his, squeezing tight. They'd been gone 8 months, long enough for everything to change. Or nothing. The town looked the same as they rolled down Main Street, but faces turned to watch their passage with expressions Luke couldn't quite read. At the general store, Tom Morrison stepped out, his jaw dropping. "Luke, Mrs. Redford, we thought—" He shook his head. "Well, we heard all sorts of things." "We're back," Luke said simply. "How's the ranch?" "Standing and solid. Been checking it weekly like we agreed." Tom's eyes went to Sarah, who was studying him with solemn dark eyes. "This your little one?" "Sarah Elena Redford," Elena said, pride and protectiveness mingling in her voice. "She's beautiful." Tom cleared his throat. "Town's different since you left. That trouble with the Apache got worse before it got better. Lost some good people. Made folks think about who's really the enemy." The ranch was dusty but intact. Elena walked through each room like she was greeting old friends, Sarah toddling unsteadily beside her. Having learned to walk on the trail, Luke found everything in reasonable order, Tom having done right by their agreement. That evening, as they sat on their own porch for the first time in months, watching the familiar sunset paint the desert, Elena finally spoke what they'd both been thinking. "I need to face them, the town. Show them we're not hiding anymore." Luke nodded. "Church on Sunday. Church on Sunday." The First Baptist Church of Cedar Falls fell silent when the Redford family entered. Elena wore her best dress, but she'd made a deliberate choice, 3/4 sleeves that showed the lower portion of her marks. Sarah rode her hip, dressed in white cotton with ribbons Rosa Martinez had sent. They took a pew near the back. Whispers rustled through the congregation like wind through grain. Reverend Henderson, older now and somehow smaller, paused in his preparations to stare. Then Rosa Martinez stood from her pew near the front. Without a word, she walked back and sat beside Elena, taking her hand. Her husband followed. Then Tom Morrison and his family, old Dr. Morrison, the blacksmith and his wife, one by one. Families moved to sit near them, until their section was full and the front pews stood nearly empty. Reverend Henderson cleared his throat. "Well then, let us begin with a prayer." After the service on the church steps, something remarkable happened. Margaret Henderson, not the minister's wife, but his daughter, now grown, approached Elena directly. "Mrs. Redford," she said formally, "I owe you an apology. When you lived here before, I was among those who made things difficult. I've had time to think, to grow. I was wrong." Elena studied the young woman for a long moment. "We all grow, Miss Henderson. That's what time is for." "Would you—" Margaret hesitated. Would you allow me to call on you? I'd like to know you better, the real you." And so began their true homecoming. Not to the same life they'd left, but to something new. The town had been scarred by increased Apache raids in their absence, had learned that danger came in many forms and salvation likewise. Elena's knowledge of Apache ways, once a source of suspicion, became valuable as she helped negotiate peaceful passages and interpreted signs of trouble. One afternoon, Sheriff Patterson came to the ranch with an unusual request. "We've got a situation. Mrs. Redford, Army brought in some Apache prisoners, including women and children. They're being held at the fort. But there's a young woman. She's in a bad way. White woman, but marked like, well, like you. Won't speak to anyone." Elena was already reaching for her shawl. "I'll come." At the fort, Elena found a girl no more than 16, huddled in a cell corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Her marks were fresh, still healing, and her blue eyes held the blank terror Elena remembered too well. "Hello," Elena said softly in Apache, then English. "My name is Elena. I was like you once." The girl's eyes focused slowly. They killed them all. My family took me. I was—" Her voice broke. "You survived," Elena said firmly. "That's what matters. You survived, and now you're free." It took hours, but eventually the girl, Mary Walsh from a destroyed homestead, let Elena close enough to see her injuries, to offer water and food. When Elena rolled up her own sleeves, showing her marks, Mary broke down completely. "What do I do now?" she sobbed. "Where do I go? No one will want me. I'm ruined." "No," Elena said fiercely. "You're not ruined. You're marked. Yes, changed. Yes, but not ruined. Never ruined." Luke found them there as sunset approached, Elena holding the girl while she cried. He took in the scene and simply asked, "Bring her home?" Elena looked up at him with such love it took his breath. "Can we?" "We've got room." Mary Walsh stayed with them for 3 months, slowly learning to speak again, to sleep without screaming, to believe in a future. Elena taught her practical things, cooking, sewing, tending garden, but more importantly, taught her how to reclaim herself. The day Mary left for California, where a cousin had agreed to take her in, she hugged Elena fiercely. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved yourself," Elena corrected. "I just showed you it was possible." Word spread. Over the following year, 3 more women came to the Redford Ranch, some recently freed, one who'd escaped on her own years before but never found peace. Elena helped them all, creating an informal network with Rosa Martinez and other women who understood. Sarah grew surrounded by languages, by stories of survival and strength. She toddled after her mother, speaking a mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache that made visitors blink. But she was loved fiercely, protected absolutely, and taught that marks on skin meant nothing compared to the contents of a heart. The day Kanta's nephew arrived, Luke nearly shot him on sight, but the young warrior raised empty hands, speaking Elena's name with respect. He'd come not to threaten, but to trade, horses for cattle, and to bring news. "The old ways are ending," he told Elena in Apache as they concluded their business. "The white soldiers are too many. We must adapt or vanish." He looked at Sarah, playing in the dirt nearby. "Perhaps children like her are the bridge. Neither one thing nor the other, but something new." "Perhaps," Elena agreed. After he left, peacefully and with fair trades made, Luke found Elena standing at the window, watching the dust of his departure. "Regrets?" he asked, as he head on the trail. "No," she said, turning into his embrace. "How can I regret the path that brought me you, that gave us Sarah, that lets me help other women find their way back to themselves?" That evening, they sat on the porch as they did every evening now, Sarah playing between them. The desert stretched out vast and unchanging, but the life they'd built here had transformed completely. What had begun as 2 lonely people seeking companionship had become something larger, a refuge, a bridge between worlds, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear. "I used to dream of escape," Elena said softly, her head on Luke's shoulder. Now I dream of Sarah grown, of grandchildren, of years spent right here with you. Ordinary dreams, beautiful dreams. Luke kissed her temple, right where a small scar showed beneath her hairline. Nothing about you is ordinary, Elena Redford. Nothing about us is ordinary. No, she agreed, smiling. We're something new, something that shouldn't exist but does, living proof that people can choose their own paths, write their own stories. Sarah toddled over, arms raised to be lifted. Elena pulled her up, settling her between them. The little girl had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, but her spirit was entirely her own, fearless and free. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena sang, not an Apache death song or a Mexican lullaby, but the traveling song she'd created on the wagon train. A song of journeys and homecomings, of marks that told stories and loves that transcended them. Her voice carried across the desert, strong and clear. No longer the voice of a captive or a survivor, but simply a woman who had claimed her place in the world and made it beautiful. In the morning, there would be work, always work on a ranch. There would be challenges, perhaps more women seeking help, certainly more negotiations as the frontier changed around them. But tonight there was this: family, home, peace, the deepest rebellion. Elena had learned. Wasn't in fighting or running. It was in choosing to be happy despite what the world had done to you. It was in building something beautiful from the ashes of sorrow. It was in extending your hand to others still trapped in darkness and saying, "There is a way out. Let me show you." As they rose to go inside, Luke carrying sleeping Sarah, Elena paused to touch the doorframe, the same gesture she'd made when they left. But this time it wasn't goodbye. It was hello. It was home. It was exactly where they belonged. Well, partners, that brings us to the end of Luke and Elena's tale. Thank you kindly for riding along on this journey through the Arizona territory, where love bloomed despite thorns and two souls found their way home to each other. I'd be mighty curious to know where in this wide world you're listening to these stories of the Old West. Are you driving across the plains, sitting by your own campfire, or perhaps tucked in bed dreaming of desert stars? Drop a comment below and let me know where the Wild West Campfire stories find you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of frontier love, courage, and redemption. Until we meet again around the fire, keep your powder dry and your hearts open, friends.